A one?
You're
Do we
live,
got it?
buddy. You're live, man. It's
All
live.
right.
Okay.
We are live, and I am in here with Burgermeister
Howdy.
and the esteemed Father Chris. Not to say Burgermeister's not esteemed, but
It's esteemed by me.
and there we go. I appreciate you gentlemen coming on. How you guys doing?
Good. Hey, what's the name of the show?
This would be the Patriotarchy broadcast or podcast.
Sounds good. Patriotarchy. Okay. I like
Put a
that,
little
actually.
spin on a novel idea such as American patriotism or patriotism.
Does it make us the Patriotarchons, or is it just you?
No, I do not hold a central title. I'm just kind of a guy who just does things.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, we don't have 5 yet to have the Patriot Pentarchy yet, so I guess we're titleless for now.
That's sweet. So tonight rather, we're going to be talking about Dune. And just, I guess, the general mythos behind it. Obviously, this is going to definitely get into some character stuff. The arrangement and assortment of the Dune universe, its mythos, and, well, I guess, as it usually goes, the more compelling characters to the story, as there are many. And
Quite a few.
just a general outline too, with some of this, layered on top. I always like to kind of go into podcasts too, with, I guess, a more free flowing format, and have some layer cake with that format too, because you can't always be too hung up on, I guess, strict definitions, or just get too hung up on some of the minor stuff. So I'll start with kind of a baseline question. Who is your favorite character? Father Chris can go first.
No, I want to hear Burger's favorite character.
Okay. All right.
Well, considering that I have literally no background in knowing Dune whatsoever, when I hear Dune, I hear about, they have a God Emperor. So 40K then. That's all I can really think of.
Yeah,
I hear of inspiration for the Warhammer franchise coming from Dune, and for it, I just hear about it inspiring all these different things, but I could never quite decipher how.
Now, have you heard any character names or anything about the plot at all?
On our last episode, JP was going on a bit about the House of Harkonnen, and I forget what the other house was that was opposing them or whatever. And how
Atreides.
Yeah, how they had this sort of dichotomic good v evil type of layout.
It is actually probably the simplest dynamic in all of Dune. Would be just the Atreides versus Harkonnen. They are just pretty much good versus evil. It's a good autarky versus a bad autarky. But of course, there's so much more. And you've heard of the God Emperor, the concept of the God Emperor, at least, but you don't know what that actually means in the Dune world.
Wasn't he like a big worm thing or something?
Okay, so you know that too. So you know about worms. What else do you know? Well, I want to get all the basic total noob, what the average person who's kind of into sci-fi but really doesn't know Dune, what do they actually know about Dune, if anything? So yeah, tell me more.
Well, that's about it, really.
Okay.
I wish I could elaborate further, but I've really said about everything that I know.
I think it's fair to say at this point, is it fair to just start off by saying spoiler alert? If you ever want to read Dune yourself or watch any of the movies and be surprised by anything, you should probably stop listening, I think.
Sure. Yeah, we can put up. Okay. Okay.
You know what I mean? It's like either that, or we could spend the first few minutes, 20 minutes, talking about the spiritual context of things or something like that. I guess.
Ooh.
And
Ooh.
we could talk about the background of the universe
Sure.
for a
Okay.
bit,
And then we can put up.
and then we'll get
Then
into
we can put up the spoiler.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Yeah. Okay. Ooh, spiritual context of things.
Yeah,
Well,
we can't really talk about the God Emperor. We can't really talk about that without major spoilers. So yeah, what's the background of Dune? What is the backstory?
so it is based on the central planet of Arrakis. And Arrakis has what is called the spice. And the spice comes from
We can't even tell anything about where the spice comes from.
Oh,
That's
okay.
major
All right. All right.
spoilers too.
Ooh,
That's
well.
not actually revealed till the second book.
Shoot. Okay.
So yeah, so it's either spoilers from here on out, or I meant like the history.
Oh, so okay.
So like the context of the universe. Yes, the planet Arrakis. There's
The planet
only one
Arrakis. Okay.
Spice
Is
makes the universe work. You know,
okay.
everybody uses it. Everybody it's required. It's the only thing that makes interstellar travel possible. And
by the Spacing Guild, yes.
By the Spacing Guild, and it's no. And do you remember what is the reason that that's true? Why is that the case? That it's only because of the spice that interstellar travel is possible.
The spice heightens human evolution.
It heightens everything. It heightens your perception. It lengthens your life. It's essentially like if it was a psychedelic drug that does everything psychedelic drugs are supposed to do as advertised, you know, like for real in the Dune universe. So essentially, it gives people a certain degree of prescience if they take enough of it. And the reason I'm trying to kind of elicit some stuff with my questions here, but what can you tell? Do you remember the Butlerian Jihad? Can you talk about the Butlerian Jihad?
That was a total, a total annihilation of learning machines and learning computers.
That happened 10,000 years before
Dune.
Before the events that happened in Dune.
Yeah. And then then you had disciplines arise out of that, like the mentats. The mentats are learning, are humans that can basically
perform like microchip level computational ability.
Yeah.
So like everything that computers used to do, humans now have to do. And everything and then when the spice is discovered, it becomes the most valuable commodity in the universe, or in the galaxy, because it allows the Spacing Guild members, or the Spacing Guild pilots, the navigators, to enhance their to live for thousands of years. They can live for centuries to millennia. And it also has sort of forcibly evolved their brains to where they can't really live outside of huge tanks filled with the spice gas. They're basically not human anymore. They have to do that in order to be able to have enough prescience and computational ability to be able to make the calculations necessary for interstellar travel. So, Berger, you're getting a sense of the weirdness of the Dune universe at this point.
So basically, it's like Joe Rogan's his utopia, where everyone's on super space DMT.
Exactly, that's right. But not everyone, only the highest echelons of society can afford the
Of
spice.
course, you gotta get behind the paywall.
Yes, yes. Well, it's because, and so everybody has a monopoly. That's another thing. Economically, every entity, the universe is essentially static. Everyone has a monopoly. The Spacing Guild has a monopoly on travel, and that means they can essentially regulate, and they all trade. Um, the Spacing Guild also works with the Chome Company. You remember what Chome is an acronym for, JP? Could you rattle that off?
Chome?
The Chome Company.
The Chome Company. It would be
Combine Honet Ober Advancer Mercantile. It's basically the only company in the universe. Like, it's the only corporation. It is a gigantic mega corporation. It regulates all trade. It conducts all trade, and of course, everyone's cash cow is the spice.
yeah. That is interesting that you brought up the, I guess, monopoly / staticness of, well, I don't even know if that's a word, the static nature of, well, I guess you could say economic activity in the Dune universe. Because if you do break that down, the main conflict of it being taking place on Arrakis, but it being between House Atreides and House Harkonnen. House Atreides, I guess what their economic stock would be they're selling paradise on a paradise planet. And then Harkonnen would essentially flip side that to, I guess, a hellish place to live, a hellish place on a planet where there's there's zero vegetation. It's all industrial. Basically, people are reproduced unnaturally.
On the Harkonnen homeworld, yeah.
Gedi Prime.
Yeah, Gedi Prime.
Caladan would be the House Atreides homeworld, which is an absolute paradise, a lush planet, just full
oceans
of
and it's everything. So then these two houses are part of something which is called the Landsraad, which is the collection of all the houses in the feudal system of the empire. But one house, are you
talking about
the Imperial
Emperor?
House.
Yeah, Carino, House Carino.
House Carino has been the emperors for 10,000 years, is it? The whole time? Basically ever since the end, or is it 4,000? I can't quite ever get it.
The Butlerian Jihad?
Ever since the Butlerian Jihad, I think the Carinos have been the Imperial House.
The Imperial Emperor Shaddam, and it's been like a Shaddam, ever since, I guess.
And again, they live for centuries too. Because everybody takes the spice. So again, when I say static, right, it really is. It's narratively static, and it's politically and economically static.
Well, that's also something interesting to note, because as far as you said something about the feudalism, and we know with basically monarchy and feudalism, those stay kind of stagnant. You have one family or house in power, and then the serfs.
I mean, it's kind of, this is unusually static, I would say. The Dune universe is unusually static, because I think at first, I don't know what to attribute it to, really. I think it makes sense in the sense that it's, at its best, Dune is about the main book called Dune. The rest of it is interesting, but nothing is as powerful, again, as the book itself, just the core book, which has like an entire mythological sort of, hero's journey featured within it. And by the way, there's more than a small argument to be made that George Lucas borrowed heavily many concepts from Dune when he was thinking of places like Tatooine and the Sand People and all of that kind of thing. But that's sort of a fruitless tangent, but just something interesting to note. He will have read it for sure. So into this, we also have other institutions, and none of this is really spoilers. It's again, this is all stuff that is explained to some measure or other in the appendices of the main book itself. And if you read the book, you'll be spending a lot of time in that appendix, in those looking at all the names and cross-referencing and all sorts of stuff. And many of the chapters in the core book also spend a good bit of time describing the past, because a lot of the chapters are headed by quotes from history books written either at the time of the events or actually long after, like maybe decades after. So it's like a quote from a historian writing about, let's say, Paul Atreides 50 years later, like after the events of Children of Dune or Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. Another thing. Okay, so that's we're at 16 minutes, and we've talked about the background. What's another main element, a main institution of the Dune universe? We've mentioned the Landsraad, the feudal houses. We've mentioned the Spacing Guild. We've mentioned the Chome Company. What else is there? JP?
I guess you could go with the overall, like, well, I know it's static, but you could go with, like, I guess the overall, like, empirical notions of all of it. Because there is definitely that at play.
What about the Bene Gesserit?
Oh, I would say they're another, like, empirical institution for sure. They have a breeding program.
And by empirical, you mean imperial?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Different concept.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Empirical is like empirical knowledge. Like
yeah. So
okay.
yeah.
Anyway, so yes, the Bene Gesserit, and I think from here, this kind of leads into spoiler territory.
Because
so what are the Bene Gesserit up to?
Well, they are.
You mentioned breeding programs.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, well, it's basic. Yeah. It's basic eugenics to create what they see as the coming Messiah,
super being.
Yes.
So anybody who's seen The Matrix can make references here as well.
Oh, Neo.
See, they know that a Messiah is coming, necessary and inevitable because of the sheer amount of psychedelic drug use that's going on in the highest levels of society. You know, in the form of the spice, in the form of the what the mentats get up to, in the form of the water of life, in the form of the Bene Gesserit have their own. Everybody's got a whole, like, everybody before the spice came along, there were other substances that were also used. This is one of the weird things about Dune is it's most often compared, and I've compared it myself, to Lord of the Rings in terms of the detail and volume of world building that was done underneath the actual narrative. But unlike Tolkien, Frank Herbert was apparently really into drugs. So,
it doesn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's a main feature of really the whole series, if you think about it.
Yeah, and I mean, the spice, in a way, even it is the utility, and it gives its own mythos to each empire, or in, kind of the houses with empirical goals. And obviously the Bene Gesserit are the ones that are kind of like the cloak and dagger, working behind the scenes.
And yet they also are they're another one of the monopolies.
Mm-hmm.
They basically have taken like a whole bunch of this spiritual territory for themselves. They're referred to, their chiefesses are referred to as Reverend Mothers
Mm-hmm.
and sisters and things like that. So they're the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, and they have complete control of all their bodily functions. So that means they can do things like transmute poisons within their body and survive. It means they can do things like decide the gender of a child that they will give birth to. It means they can, be unbelievably awesome martial artists. For example, they have a martial art called the Weirding Way, which is part martial art and part like messing with your opponent's mind so that he doesn't exactly know where you're attacking from next, and also having a small degree of prescience when you fight. So stuff like that. That's all going on in the Dune universe too. Berger, you can probably begin to see where some of the Warhammer inspiration stuff comes from.
Yeah. One thing that I found interesting is all the comparisons with the Lord of the Rings universe. And I can see Middle Earth as being the main thing it would be compared in sort of an equal sense to, because it was the only major sort of fantasy universe that pre-existed Dune, right? So the other ones could just be said to be sort of derivative of it, like Star Wars and Warhammer. But
I
with
mean,
Lord
there
of the Rings,
was also Conan, like the whole Conan thing existed. I don't know if Robert, if it was very well thought out, but it did exist. There was like, but it was nothing to the degree of that level of complexity. No.
right? But what piqued my interest with that is that it's almost like the drugs in this universe are being used as the equivalent of magic in other fantasy universes, because the sort of stagnation element, like the fact that everything is sort of the same through all time, this kind of fits in with the magical theory of stagnation, where magic just like halts technological progress. And it seems kind of similar, except the drugs are, in effect, they have magical effects. So there's really no reason for innovation because of them.
Now, we talked about the Butlerian Jihad, and this is interesting, by the way, because this is another area where Frank Herbert, almost by accident, in just creating the backstory for his universe, essentially imagined like everything that happened in Dune is like after, like what the entire Matrix and Terminator series are about, which is a complete AI takeover of the entire human race, and it's threatened, complete annihilation. So that's why the Butlerian Jihad happened. Is and it actually became a religious thing in the Dune universe. It's like a new religious commandment, which is thou shalt not make a machine in a man's image. And because of that religious law, it's not just like an imperial law or whatever, but it's like, it has religious significance to most of the inhabitants of the universe. So that's another important aspect to it, is we haven't even really touched on the fact that at its core, Dune is actually, I mean, you could argue one of the core elements of Dune is actually religion itself. The phenomenon of it, how it can be manipulated, but also how people with faith can transcend the fact that they've been manipulated.
And this would be a good time to drop the spoiler alert, because can definitely get into some deep territory.
Spoilers from here on out then.
All right.
Back to the Bene Gesserits. They are engaged in a breeding program, yes, that has lasted for thousands of years. And the purpose of the breeding program is to create the Kwisatz Haderach. I forget what the Kwisatz Haderach literally means. I think it's like one who can be many places at once or something
Yeah,
like that.
one who is in many places at once. He keeps saying Paul Atreides, the main protagonist of the story, in both Dune and Dune Messiah, keeps saying that over and over again. I am the one who looks in the place that you cannot see.
Right. So that's the other aspect of it. The Kwisatz Haderach is essentially a female Bene Gesserit. But
it's supposed to be.
I mean, it's not, and by Bene Gesserit just means learned in all the Bene Gesserit ways and capable with the mental capacities to do it all. But the reason they've got the breeding program is they want to have complete control of this being whenever he's born. So to that end, they engage in this millennia-long breeding program, which at the point of the beginning of the events of Dune is 2 generations from completion. So they think it's just around the corner, and because of how near it is, and because of how close to the Bene Gesserit totality, which is one of the things they call it, how close they are to it in time, Jessica, the concubine of the Duke Leto Atreides, who is also herself a Bene Gesserit sister, and they often serve as concubines to the great lords of the Landsraad, partially so that they can continue to carry out this breeding program in secret, because they're the one. Part of the reason they're able to do it is because they're the ones that are training the women that will become the mothers of the next generation in the breeding program. But Jessica is therefore ordered only to bear daughters in case the Kwisatz Haderach is accidentally born. And instead she disobeys and gives birth to a son because she loves her duke and wants to give him an heir. And so love becomes the completely unpredictable factor that screws up every major institution's plans in the entire Dune universe. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Spot on. And with the, well, it's kind of like a 1984 thing where love is the revolutionary act to break away from the stagnation. And obviously with her giving birth to the heir, Paul Atreides, well, then him being the protagonist that he is and what he becomes after his religious experience, that gives way to the whole other dynamic of that stagnant and static universe falling apart. And him creating, well, I guess order out of chaos, but
well, actually what he does is he makes chaos where there was order.
Yeah.
That's what he actually does. And again, we said spoilers from here on out. The Dune book, the first book, Dune, it definitely stands alone as a great book. But everything falls apart after the first book. It falls apart multiple times. The story of the Dune saga is essentially one huge galactic shakeup after another. You may have been aware. You've probably, you guys who have followed. Let's just say, we're not going to talk about Trump per se, but he was often compared to the God Emperor. People would feature like pictures of him in the
Oh, those
uniform,
memes are great.
and that kind of thing. Like those are sort of derived from the Dune universe. But there's a phrase you may have heard: the golden path. You've not read Children of Dune, JP, right?
I have not, but
You read Dune Messiah, but not Children of Dune. So that's the next
okay.
one. Dune Messiah is the second book, and Children of Dune is the third.
Okay.
Messiah takes place immediately after, a couple of years after Dune, maybe like 10 years after. And then Children of Dune is the immediate sequel to it, at the end of which the God Emperor is born or created or comes into his own. So yeah, the God Emperor thing doesn't come along until book 3. Then book 4 is actually entitled God Emperor of Dune. But I guess we're getting ahead of ourselves here. The point being is, it all does fall apart. And we talked about religion. One of the things Frank Herbert does in the second book is he shows, and Paul sees a vision of this, if I remember correctly, in the first book, a vision of jihad. Like they become so successful so quickly that they attract, like, all the Fremen warriors essentially just spill out into the galaxy and just start like persecuting everyone, and billions are killed.
Well, Paul calls it, and right, you said it. It was order out of chaos, because he brings the chaos, but in his mind, he's also internally feeling this chaos, and he's filled with what's called terrible purpose.
And that's the thing, is that Leto, which is Paul's son,
Leto the Second.
Leto the Second, he is the one who becomes the God Emperor. And Berger, step in with like any questions or comments or like oh my gods or anything like that.
Well, it's all very convoluted, clearly.
Convoluted.
Thankfully, I'm used to convoluted universes with libraries full of lore. But looking at sort of these events leading up to the creation of the Emperor in this universe, it actually reminds me of the lore for the origin of the 40K universe, right?
Yeah.
Like Warhammer 40K, it almost looks like it could kind of occur after Dune, right? Like I see similarities with talking about like the Men of Iron, like kind of the robotic takeover of society, and then humanity being like super advanced before then, and being sort of psionic and the like, in this case through drugs. It all lines up with sort of the pre-story, and you can almost consider, other than the reinterpreted twist on what the Emperor is, you can almost consider 40K to be like a bit of a sequel to Dune in a sense, just radically reinterpreted.
It spawned its own genre, which is imperial sci-fi. So you've got Warhammer 40K, you've got BattleTech. BattleTech is only it's only 3,000 to 3,500. 1,000 to 1,500 years in the future, as opposed to 40,000 years in the future. I think the Dune universe is 40,000 years in the future. Actually, it's in the year 10,191 of the third era, or is it the fourth era?
Yeah, third or fourth. It's either third or fourth era.
But that again that era is defined as having begun at the end of the Butlerian Jihad. Essentially, all the houses, if I remember correctly, Brian Herbert, Frank's son, wrote a bunch of the prequels out based on his father's notes, and I never read any of them. I just kind of gleaned some of the info from them.
It was based on like all the houses. It explained all the houses and their positions,
and it also told the story of the war. The first prequel that he did, I think, was the Butlerian Jihad stuff. but or maybe it was a House Atreides. Anyway, all of the houses came out of the Butlerian Jihad. They were like all the people that made it happen, that won against the machines, or that significantly contributed to the victory. And so that's who all of the, static institutions are when the narrative starts. So should we? What do you have any questions, Berger, or should we just go through the plot? I don't necessarily want to necessarily just go point by point through the plot.
Yeah, I figured this was supposed to be really a bit more of a commentary on it than sort of a dry laying out of Dune in itself. But when you're dealing with something this big, I can kind of see where you almost have to spend a whole episode just laying it out before you can actually like attack it,
Well, then let's talk about some other. So we've set the stage, for who the main players are when the story starts. You've got the Landsraad, you've got the Emperor Shaddam IV, you've got the Spacing Guild. The Chome Company doesn't really enter into it. What the Chome Company is essentially the combination of all these groups. It's shareholders. So all of the Landsraad, the Emperor, the Guild, and the Bene Gesserits are all shareholders, major shareholders of the Chome Company. So that's kind of the context of it. You've also, within that, you've got more specifically House Harkonnen and House Atreides. And specifically, you also have on Arrakis the Fremen. The Fremen are the native desert people of Arrakis. And then you've got the Emperor's the Emperor's house army, which are called the Sardaukar. The Sardaukar are men who have been raised on the House Carino's home world, which is a barren hellscape.
Oh, it's the House Carino's prison planet.
I thought it was also their core world.
Oh, so they got two? Oh, okay.
I could be wrong. But in any case, they're raised there. Some of them, it was their prison. It was a prison planet. I can't remember the details of this. I mean, that there's people who spend their whole lives there, though. Who like are born there and like grow up there or die there. Most die there. The Sardaukar are the ones who did not die, and so that's the Emperor's private army. What else we got? Any major points?
Well, yeah, I mean, we could definitely get into like the virtues and religious aspects of these quote unquote static static houses. What's always been really interesting to me is Atreides, and the virtues that are important to them. They're like everything that's good, just. They hold a lot of like, well, I guess you could say Greek and Roman. That kind of comes through in their through their house. They have virtues that are, well, I mean, just virtues that are just flat out good, and they try to achieve perfection in a way that's natural to humanity. Versus Harkonnen, they're inverted, they're evil. They're all the disgusting things that we don't want to be.
They're 100% degenerate.
Yes,
they really are. The Harkonnen, the Baron Harkonnen, likes to have sex with underage boys and then kill them. That's like his favorite pastime. Not an exaggeration.
No, literally in the book.
So he's training, and he is responsible for training his heir. He has two
which
nephews.
are his nephews.
He has two
Yes.
nephews. One of them he knows is going to be the heir. The other one is basically no more than a tool to do dirty work and, fodder for the executioner one day. And that is, again, we're in spoiler territory, but the beast, Raban, really, he doesn't exist for any other reason than to be the man that Fade, his brother, will save people from.
Yeah, the monster, the kill, the
beast.
menace.
The beast Raban.
Yeah, and then Fade Ralpha, who was played by Sting in the David Lynch version.
Yes.
Great hair. Absolutely great hair, but
Great
that's about it.
I will kill him. I will kill him.
About as dramatic as
I love it, man. I love it. Don't start talking smack about my David Lynch Dune. Come on now.
I mean, I'm sorry. I guess I'm too used to like the fancy stuff, that we got nowadays.
I tell you, it's not his greatest movie, and it's probably his least favorite movie that he ever made. And it's not a great movie, but it is a fantastic, fun, like B movie to watch, and it has some great moments. It has great performances, and especially the woman I think it's Sean Phillips, who plays the Bene Gesserit mother, Gaius Helen Mohiam, is fantastic.
Oh, the Mother Superior, yeah.
Yes, put your hand in the box.
Oh yeah, her voice is creepy too.
It's the voice, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Bene Gesserit can do this thing called the voice, where in the movie they go all crazy with it. They make it like some kind of supernatural power, but it's really, again, they have like 100% control over their every physical function. So, and they have studied the ways of hypnosis and all this kind of thing. So they essentially can, if they learn even a little bit about a person, they can speak in such a way that they can directly manipulate that person's actions.
It's the classic, these aren't the droids you're looking for, Burger.
Right.
I mean, that's basically their whole shtick. I mean, they just try to manipulate every situation that they could possibly be in, but they do it differently than the Harkonnen do it. The Harkonnen want to do it through, I guess you could say, the masculine aspects and the masculine virtues.
Classical feudal power games is what it
yes.
is. That's the Harkonnen thing. They the opening, one of the opening dynamics between the Baron Harkonnen and the Duke Leto Atreides is that there is an ongoing vendetta between their families.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Landsraad, there is a specific rule set that you're supposed to follow if you're engaged in a vendetta with another family, which is Can Lee, and so that's one of the opening dynamics between the Baron and the Duke, is we're given to understand that it is a vendetta, and it's it can't be satisfied unless one or the other are completely destroyed.
It's just a complete dichotomic opposition between these two.
100%. Yeah. I know it's not all from the book, but my mind always goes to the Lynch movie, because I just have seen it so many times. But the Baron, the forms of Canley have been obeyed. He's like, he sent an official invitation to try and speak with the Duke, and the Duke's like, no, I'm not talking to you. The Duke does not wish to meet or talk with you. So there's this whole very ritualized and yet quite deadly back and forth between the two houses.
Yeah, and that's something that's also interesting when it comes to the book, because there's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of like, you'll get like the external dialogue of the characters, and then all of a sudden the book will cut to the internal dialogue of what the character is thinking, what their next action might be, or what somebody else's next action might be.
There's so much
or what they're thinking.
Internal monologue, and
yes.
also everybody has some kind of secret language that they can speak to each other when other people are around.
Through just pure
sign language. It's like the Bene Gesserit do it through like a combination of sign language. It's they speak, but when they make certain signs with their hands while they speak, their words take on a different meaning to anybody that actually that knows the language, the sign language. So then in the book, you've got these scenes where people are engaged in a conversation, a larger conversation in a room full of characters, but they're also talking secretly to each other in plain sight. And Herbert loves those kind of scenes in his. I've read some of his other stories too. He just, it's all very heady, literally heady.
Yeah,
you're constantly surrounded by the inner thoughts of everybody.
Just absolute. Wow, what can I do to slit this guy's throat? Kind of thing.
Yes, exactly. Or what's he doing to try to slit mine, and how can I get him first? And that kind of dynamic, which is a lot of what he was focused on in the scene setting was, imagine all the characters are, again, from the absolute highest echelons of society. There's no, except I guess you could say the Fremen. The Fremen are really the one exception.
Yeah, but you even think about that too. Look at how honorable the Fremen are out of all of those houses. I mean, for them to be desert savages, but yet they're the people who are basically the most noble and honorable out of all of them in their rituals.
Well, sure, they'll still kill you in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
without asking questions.
But for pure survival reasons and the good betterment of the tribe.
The book stresses the fact that they are like extremely pragmatic. Extreme pragmatism is the Fremen way of life. It's everything is about water. And if they don't know you, if they're not part of your tribe, you're a stranger, you get killed.
Without even,
and your water is taken, and they just take you and reduce your body down, suck all the water out of it, and then go on about their business.
Well, it has a very Middle Eastern and Arabic undertone to it too, because that is how a lot of Middle Eastern cultures operate and think, especially with them being predominantly Islamic. I mean, if you're outside of it and you don't believe in Islam, then you're seen as an outsider, and you're not here to bring good things to the faith.
In one interpretation of it, certainly that's true. And yes, the Fremen are essentially space Muslims. That would be fair to say.
Yeah, highly influenced by Middle Eastern culture for sure. Like,
and what was generally thought of Middle Eastern culture in the West in the 60s when Herbert was writing the books.
That's totally true.
It needs to be contextualized, I think, because there's definitely a certain sort of romanticism about it that is not really the case today.
Right.
It's too messy now.
Yeah, there's no more Arabian Nights.
I mean, jihad. He uses the word jihad more than once. There's the
Holy War,
the Butlerian jihad, and then like Paul's followers, the Fremen, instigate their own jihad after he becomes emperor. And it turns on such a dime too. That's one of the interesting things about it is, they are the absolute good guys in the book, in the first book in Dune. They become Paul's army. He commands their complete loyalty. He takes them from absolute rags to riches. There's a phrase, and I actually, you'll have to forgive me, I can't remember if it's in the book, but I'm pretty sure it is. But in any case, it's said many times in the Lynch movie, which is, "He who controls the spice controls the universe."
You got it.
And that's essentially, if we're just doing commentary, it's like that's pretty much the end of the book. Is Paul is able to bring this entire set of institutions to its knees because none of them gave any real account to the Fremen. They thought of the Fremen as backward desert-dwelling savages. They had no idea how many of them there really were, because no census was able to be taken in the desert, and the Fremen live in the desert. That's the thing about the planet Arrakis too. The conditions on it are so extreme that the actual settled areas where anyone outside of the planet itself ever sees or lives are very different from the desert. It's a desert planet, but there's also like a couple of large rocky areas where the off-world citizens are, and it's where like the corporations and Landsrat houses do their business and stuff like that. But
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead, please. At any point, please, because I could talk forever. We know about this stuff already.
But, just looking at this externally, well, I'm noticing very much a Lawrence of Arabia type of tone with the Fremen and with how they're led by this guy, Paul, I believe.
Yes.
To go
Yes, a white man comes in and takes complete control of the native population. Just turns him into his person.
The white.
But
okay, you're gonna get demonetized now.
Yeah, but it's a very
dang
it. Yeah, but it's a very old school Orientalist, and that comes out of that that view from the '60s. It's sort of the last hurrah of old school Orientalism, I would say, in the way it's viewed.
That's actually a pretty good take. I've never really thought, because I'm not aware really of that, other than very tangentially through Lawrence of Arabia and stuff by reputation or feel, But when you contextualize it in the era in which it was written in that way, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and even looking at the Empire and the society, when you're contrasting the Fremen with it, I almost see parallels to the Ottoman Empire, because not only do you have like the Harkonnens, who are essentially practicing Bakibazi, which the Ottoman Turks were infamous for, more so than even any other parts of the Muslim world. And you also have the Emperor, who the people who you're talking about were like his imperial guards. They essentially appear to be sort of a Janissary class.
That's what they are, yes. After they become Bene Gesserits. Sorry. Sorry about my throat. You pick it up, JP.
Yeah, okay. So after I think he was going to say, after they become Bene Gesserits.
Not Bene Gesserit.
Oh, the no. Imperial class? Or Imperial Guard?
Yeah.
Guard of House Carino pretty much protects House Harkonnen, because House Harkonnen wants to overtake Arrakis, but Atreides comes to Arrakis first, because Harkonnen is kind of waiting in the wings for them to strike Arrakis at the right time to take it over. So then that way House Carino is working in line with House Harkonnen to deceive and undermine House Atreides for Arrakis.
Well, Harkonnen had the rights, the management of Arrakis, and the Emperor replaced them with Atreides, which he did as a ruse to make Atreides think that he had his favor. And at the same time, he's got a plan with Harkonnen to lend him a few legions of his Sardaukar. And you mentioned the comparison to the Janissaries. That's what I was trying to get at before, is that, once the Sardaukar are off the planet, what the heck's the name of it? I can't remember the name of that planet, the Sardaukar. Carino planet. They then become, like a very highly favored class. I mean, they're like feared by everybody, and given large benefits in spice and money and women. But that's only if they survive. which is like 1 in 10, that kind of thing. But yes, I never had considered the comparison to the Ottomans before. Actually, that's also very interesting. Um, but here's the other thing: is the Fremen, and this is sort of one of the secrets that's revealed in the first book, is that the Fremen exist in far larger numbers than the Empire or anyone had suspected, and they deliberately hide their numbers. And they have been building up large caches of water over the course of many, many years. And here's another interesting aspect of the book in terms of world building. It gets way into ecology too. Not that it's some sort of green treatise or anything. It's actually kind of strange. But yeah, in a way it is, I suppose. But the point is that there's a man, one of the characters, the imperial ecologist, planetologist, the imperial planetologist, Liet Kynes. He's sort of gone native. That's one of the plot elements. And by going native, he's essentially become Fremen. He's come into contact with the tribes. He's become trusted by them. And initially, he was on the planet to do survey work and report, just planetary facts, facts about the planet's ecology. And instead, he discovered the true relationship, what the worms are actually up to. We haven't talked about the worms. We haven't talked about the worms. Burger, you probably know about the worms, right? At least.
Don't eat the worm.
Very vaguely.
Okay.
They're the reason the
you
spice
can't eat the worms.
exists.
Listen, on Arrakis, worm eat you.
It's big.
It's
big.
So the worms, yeah, they're hundreds of meters long.
They kind of remind me of the Beetlejuice worms too. They kind of like have that vibe to them as well.
That's a total ripoff from Dune, obviously.
Yes, it is.
I mean, as is, yeah.
Is that where they got holes from? Because that's where I first remember the freaking worms. I think is in holes.
Oh, with the children's book?
Or I don't even remember. Like it was a movie, is what I saw.
Okay, I think it was also a children's book.
It might not have been that, but I remember watching something, and there were giant worms coming up out of holes and eating.
Oh yeah, my god! They made 5 of those movies. Yeah. They're all amazing. So
Tremors. I like the first one a lot. The one with Kevin Bacon's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, it basically the worms eat the spice or eat whatever is in the ground, and their excrement is the spice.
Their excrement, no, the spice is what happens when water comes into contact with their excrement.
Oh, okay, so it's the water. Oh, that's right.
And the combination of the two creates there's an explosive effect, which is
crystallizing,
which is called spice blow.
Okay.
They know what happened. Like the people, the Fremen know this. The Fremen know all of this. They keep it secret from the Offworlders. And one of the things is Liet Kynes discovers this fact. He discovers that there's a relationship between the worms and the spice. And the worms are thought of as this big plague, but the truth is spice wouldn't exist without them. It's the only thing Offworlders know is that worms defend the spice sand. So there's like a scene early on in the book where, and in the movie, of course, where there's a spice harvester that's working. And one of the things that's known about the worms is they attack any rhythmic vibrations. Which I guess is kind of like, well, all vibrations are rhythmic, but the point is, anything that's like, not just sort of a one-off or, just a little animal running across the sand or something. So any machinery, in other words. And they also hang around the general vicinity of spice sand. So the spice blow is when it, comes from underneath the ground and it blows up, and then the big bunch of it lands above ground, or in the top layers of the sand. So this harvester's in the middle of working, and a worm attacks the harvester and swallows it whole. And so that's how the spice comes about. The other thing the worms do is the water of, there's this thing in the book, the water of life. I mentioned the water of life before.
Yeah, that's very crucial to the story, and Paul becoming the metamorphosizing into the Kwisatz,
which again is essentially a Messiah figure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fair to say. He is. It's the complete hero's journey.
And if we're going completely biblical with it, I guess the first half, when he's in the desert and trying to find himself, would be the Old Testament, and the second half would be the New Testament after he takes the water of life.
I don't know if I'd do a 1-to-1 allegory. I guess you could. I never thought about it in those terms, but it's an interesting way to look at it.
Because he goes from coming out, and it's kind of an inverse as well, because if you think about it, he thinks he's doing something just, and he's doing something for his house, his father, and acting in accordance with Atreides and their values.
He is yes.
Yeah.
He's a prisoner of fate. He's a prisoner of his birth and his breeding.
Mm-hmm.
An absolute prisoner. Even though he gains the ability to see the future, he actually becomes even more of a prisoner.
Because he's so limited. Well, he's unlimited, but at the same time, he's so limited by it. But then he comes out of taking the water of life and becoming the Kwisatz Haderach, and then just becoming this figure of chaos.
He becomes an emperor. He becomes a god.
Yeah.
To the Fremen, a living god. Even though he's not not the god emperor. Even though he's an emperor and he's a god, he's not the god emperor yet.
Yeah.
But he can see the future. He takes the water of life, and the water of life, by the way, Berger, if you had to guess, what would you say the source of the water of life is? Knowing what you know about mythology and everything like that, what would you guess?
I'm guessing that it probably has something to do with maybe the origin of the spice, right? Like does it come from the same planet? Pretty much?
Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, then, yeah, like the worms and the spice and the water, I think all tie together somehow.
Absolutely. The water of life is the bile from a newborn worm of Arrakis that is drowned in water by the Fremen to kill it. And as it dies, it vomits. And they collect its vomit in a container, and then you drink it, and that's the water of life.
That's a really interesting sort of dark baptism they have going on.
It's pretty interesting, isn't it? Yes. And yeah, so it contains, it's sort of like spice. It's spice plus in a condensed form.
Yeah, very potent. And they said, if Paul were to take the water of life, they continually warn him, you may not survive this.
Well, and that's one of the themes, right? I mentioned before, we talked about the Bene Gesserit, and they have the ability to transmute poisons within their body. So it's one of the reasons why the Kwisatz Haderach will be a male Bene Gesserit, is that he will be able to do that, to take the water of life and survive. Every male who has ever tried to take it before has died. That's sort of set up early on in the book.
Yes, they do foreshadow that big time, because you think, that Paul's taking a very strong risk in doing it, but then again, the internal dialogue of a lot of the characters foreshadow it, especially his mother, Jessica. She's the one who kind of just foreshadows and feigns it the most because of her internal dialogue to herself, her son, obviously Duke Leto, and her interplay between when the Mother Superior, visits her and, tries to, I guess, scold her in some way, shape, or form.
It's love breaks through here again.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yep.
Because it's because Jessica loves the mother. She loves the Duke, but she also loves her son, and she loves the Reverend Mother.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Reverend Mother essentially raised her. Taught her everything she knows and says, she was Jessica, you were my best student.
Mm-hmm.
But Jessica betrayed everything the Reverend Mother stands for, but the Reverend Mother, by giving birth to a son.
Mm-hmm.
But the Reverend Mother also loves Jessica. And because of her love for Jessica, she agrees to help, after putting Paul through the trial of the box, the Gom Jabbar. Have you seen any Gom Jabbar memes, Burger?
No, actually.
Okay. Or anything put your hand in the box memes or anything like that?
I might have seen one, but
okay.
I haven't seen many of them, and I didn't get it either. So
right. So yeah. So that's the Gom Jabbar is the name of it's like a trial, or I guess it's the name of a poison. Really, technically, it's the name of a poison. But early on in the book, there's a very famous scene where it's actually, I guess, the first scene. It's the first scene in the book. It's the very first thing.
Which, surprisingly enough, I don't think I was going to get to this, but the sci-fi movie did that right off the bat.
Yeah.
The one that you're a big fan of, the Dune movie, the 1984 version.
Starts with the Imperial throne room and the Spacing Guild arriving.
Yes.
And the navigator giving some expository dialogue. By the way, that has some of my favorite memes of all time are Spice Navigator memes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean, it's the most natural phrase ever in today's internet, right? The spice must flow.
The memes must flow.
But I mean, and they must be spicy, right?
Oh.
So the spice must flow.
So maybe that is the origin of calling it a spicy meme. It might or it might not be, but
I never. That's pretty good.
Yeah. So yeah. But yeah, in the book and in the Sci-Fi Channel movie or miniseries, the first thing that happens is the Reverend Mother shows up to the Atreides home world and castle of the Duke. It's because she is coming to test Paul, who's 15 when the story begins. And having heard all this background, it's like, to the Reverend Mother, she's essentially terrified. She shows up, she's like, this is, she's really angry at Jessica. But she has this duty to perform, which is, if he's going to be the Kwisatz Haderach, we have to know as soon as possible. And the only way that we can know that he might be is if he survives the Gom Jabbar. And the Gom Jabbar is a test, and in this test, you put your hand in the box. And if you take your hand out of the box, you die. The moment that Paul agrees, he puts his hand in the box, and then she puts a needle to his neck, and it's like, she's going to stab him in the neck with the needle. He'll die instantly if he removes his hand from the box. And the box simply makes his hand feel like it's burning and like melting off. And there's a real interesting concept that comes here. She says, so he survives, and she puts him through this crazy test, and she almost scares herself because she sort of doubles the intensity of the test. And then when it's done, she said no man ever withstood that much. And she says a human. She said, I wanted to see whether the Duke's son was a human or an animal. And he says, you suggest the Duke's son could be an animal? And there's this like haughty, feudal lord, young master kind of tone that he has. And she says, let us say I suggest you may be human. A human can withstand any pain. And she's like, if you were an animal, you do anything you could to get out of an animal. Let's say a wolf. She says, if a wolf gets caught in a trap, he's going to gnaw his leg off. There's she says, a regular animal trick, that. So the only thing an animal is interested in is in getting away, escaping. But a human will withstand the pain as long as possible, figure out as much as possible about who set the trap, and then go kill that person. So she actually says that. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but she's like, that's what a person would do if they're caught in a trap. They figure out a way to get out of it without losing their foot. Then they find out who set the trap, which is actually a theme for the whole rest of the book. Because
I was just going to say, it's got a lot of that whole sentence has a lot of foreshadowing with it.
Absolutely, which I never actually thought about before just this moment, which I'm kind of shocked at myself that that's the case, but it's the case. Yeah, it's Berger, go ahead.
Looking at this before we got to the whole trap point, I'm seeing so much Old Testament allegory to this. Like it's just overflowing with it. Like the whole concept of giving the son to God in a sense, putting him through the trial. It almost reminds me of the sacrificing of the son, right? Where God
Abraham and Isaac
rewards Abraham's faith. Yeah. In a sense, that's what it reminds me of in a way. And then there was some other stuff before that even that very much reminded me of that.
Yeah, and of course that's what happens is Atreides is destined to walk into a trap. And there's a whole dialogue that Paul has with his father when they're going to Arrakis. And Paul's like, why are we going if we know it's a trap?
Yeah, Duke Leto is a very tragic hero. I mean, he's
not even a hero. I mean, he's just a tragic figure, really.
Yeah, I mean,
he was a hero when in his younger life. You gather that he was a hero, but he's
a very valiant, just, and obviously I would call him a pragmatic leader too. But in the sense of his high qualities being, all the good virtues again.
Sort of like Sean Bean's character in Game of Thrones or something. I forget the character's name, which is shameful.
Ned Stark.
Yeah, Ned Stark. He's a Ned Stark type of guy.
Not Tony Stark.
He is not.
No. Okay.
So that would be more of a Tleilaxu type of guy.
It would be. Oh, cool. But yeah, I mean, it's just walking into absolute tragedy, and having his whole world flipped upside down.
And that's the thing, right? Is that Paul knows it's a trap. His father knows it's a trap, and the trap is, as we've said, that the Emperor has invited the House Atreides to take over management of Arrakis from their old rival Harkonnen. He can't refuse. The Duke can't refuse. And the reason he can't refuse is not just because it would offend the Emperor or whatever, but it's like no house could possibly refuse the power and wealth that comes with managing Arrakis, because corruption is assumed. You're skimming off the top at every possible part of the operation.
But to House Atreides, corruption does not come natural, and that's
Well,
probably
see, but that's
why they know.
This is sort of the unspoken thing. It's not. I don't know if it's even really unspoken. It's like the management of Arrakis comes with power and wealth, and I mean, you're managing it, which means you are taking essentially just a middleman's fee for every transaction that happens to do with the spice. Not to mention being able to build up your own store of it, which it's worth more than its weight in gold. So, so he has to take it because it's for the same reason. There's the Duke, even though he's a good man, he's also a part of this system. He's part of the static system we talked about. So it's the same reason why Jessica is his concubine and not his wife. It's because he's holding out from marrying anybody until he feels that it would be advantageous for his house.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Because Paul does marry the Padishah Emperor's daughter
correct,
out
not Shani.
Out of pure,
out of political expediency.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Padishah, that's another Ottoman corollary there, because that's actually one of the titles that the Ottoman sultans used was Padishah. So, again, another overlap that people might not notice. But, how, I'm wondering, looking at this versus some other universes like, say, Star Wars or 40K, how centralized is this empire? Like, how much direct authority?
That's the other part, right? Is, like, interstellar travel is only possible with the spice, and it's only done by the Spacing Guild. So there are these ships called Guild Highliners, which are enormous ships that can hold many other ships within them. And then in these Highliners, they travel interstellar distances.
Because the Guild Navigators can literally bend space and time to get to the destination.
The bending part, and I you can tell me if this is anywhere else. I think the bending part only happens in the Lynch movie, but I could be wrong about that. They call it folding space.
Okay. They do.
In the Lynch movie. I think they did that just as like first of all, sort of an updated science fiction conceit, because like the concept of doing that, I think, had maybe gained more prominence in.
Oh, it's more so of like
something.
I guess you could say attach it to. We've touched on this, but attach it to like the drug culture. Like, whoa, man, you're bending space and time. Not folding it.
A little bit, but yeah, it's so. If I remember correctly, in the books, it's simply a matter of the fact that without AIs, they can't perform the calculations necessary to make it possible to make traveling interstellar distances at faster than light speeds. So, because it requires, again, an enormous amount of prescience to be able to know where all the suns and stars and planets are going to be when you get there. That kind of thing. But in any case, it can only be done by the Guild Navigators, and only the Spacing Guild can do interstellar travel. So one of the rules that exists actually is a Highliner could be transporting ships from houses that are at war with each other, but the houses, like, they don't ever reveal who their other passengers are. So they're ostensibly a completely neutral organization within the sort of imperial structure, but
simply because they have to be in order.
For basically just pure utilitarian purposes. I mean, they're just there to do the bidding of the spice, and that's it.
But the other thing is, of course, in the context of the Dune book, that's not at all true. They are conspiring with the Emperor and the Bene Gesserit to prevent uh, Paul Atreides from coming to maturity. The guild has the navigators have enormous foresight. So they have also predicted the Kwisatz Haderach, and they've predicted that it will be Paul, and so they want him dead. So they are conspiring with the Emperor, and ostensibly also with the Bene Gesserit, but the Bene Gesserit have their own whole. They don't. The Spacing Guild and the Bene Gesserit hate each other.
Mm-hmm.
They
have their own.
hate each other. They essentially represent two almost different religions or priest classes within this structure.
I can definitely see that.
They almost strike me as like a secret society, right?
Oh,
like everything that they
got
do.
That vibe.
Yeah. And
absolutely, yeah.
When you look at how the one woman who was giving birth to that Duke's child, it almost looks like sort of a conflict between the nobility and the secret society in a sense, because you talk about being an upheaval of society. Well, it's two different parts of society sort of at each other's throats, but it ends up creating something that causes upheaval to everything.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing is, the Emperor is setting this trap for the Duke because he fears the Duke. He fears the Duke because the Duke is good, and because the fact that the Duke is good and competent and generally respected means that he's gaining in popularity within the Landsraad. And so the House Atreides actually represents a significant challenge, or at least as the Emperor sees it, a possible challenge to the Imperial House of Carino. The Duke actually sees the same thing. Of course, the whole point of the Landsraad is everybody's jockeying for power all the time, with the ostensible goal that somebody might even be able to be the Emperor someday, which means that essentially the Emperor is everyone's enemy in real terms. But at the moment, the biggest threat that the Emperor sees to his power is House Atreides.
Which is kind of strange, because you figured the Emperor would not be the guy acting like the one who has the knife in his back all the time. You would expect that out of House Harkonnen and, the Baron. He's kind of the guy that's obviously the main bad guy. But in a sense, the overarching, I guess the overlord of the bad guy would be the Emperor.
Oh yeah,
and that interplay between the both of them is just bad guy versus bad guy trying to take out the good guy.
Harkonnen is ruled by his stomach. He's ruled by his lusts entirely.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Berger?
I was saying that this almost resembles certain elements of the ruling class of today, and some of their, you could say, more useful idiots on the street. I see a bit of a corollary between the two. Like, the cartoon villain is never going to be the main villain in real terms. He's always got somebody more far-sighted and more pragmatic above him that's using him to fight the real threat to his power.
Absolutely, yeah. So, and the thing is that this is happening at multiple layers. The Emperor is using the Baron. The Baron is using Raban. And Fade is using his uncle and his brother and the Emperor. But so that's the other dynamic, is Fade represents the dark mirror of Paul. Another part of this whole thing, we haven't. I mean, of course, the fact that the Bene Gesserit have a thousands of years long breeding program would seem to speak to their level of manipulation, but it actually goes deeper than that. They have more than just a breeding program. In service of this breeding program to create the Kwisatz Haderach, they also have created religious legends on every world in the Empire that they've touched. The whole purpose of the creation of these religious legends is for no other reason than to give themselves, on a lower level, to give themselves safe haven anywhere they might be stranded. Like if they're exiled or they're in trouble on a world, then a Bene Gesserit sister will be able to link in with the religion of that world and place herself within it in a believable way to its adherents. So this, I forget what they call this. This has a specific name actually in the book. This whole concept and this plan that they've done. It's got some sort of Latinate term, the missionaria protectiva.
Missionaria protectiva.
Yeah, missionaria protectiva, the protective mission, right? So that's only just a protection method that they have for themselves. So Paul and his mother, when everything goes to hell in the book, and his father's dead, and the Baron's and the Emperor's plan seems to have worked, and they've taken over Arrakis again, and been betrayed. They find themselves in the middle of the desert, where the Baron essentially thinks he had planned to have them killed. He wanted to see their bodies, but he's like, well, they're in the desert. Classic, right?
Classic bad guy maneuver.
Classic bad guy right there. Yeah, it's fine. There's still no one could survive that desert. So they run into a Fremen tribe there, and the first thing that happens is Paul and Jessica both kind of kick ass. Like they beat a couple of guys in a straight fist fight, and she's using the weirding way, and so is Paul. And that's one of the things that actually ingratiates them with the tribe, because they're like, oh, it's part of our legend. There would be one that would come among us who would know our ways as if they were his own.
Yes,
but the reason that's their ways is because the Bene Gesserit sisterhood has been active on Arrakis the entire time, but they've also gone native. So there are Bene Gesserit sisters on Arrakis. They have their own Reverend Mother, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But they're Fremen. Like they're not really down with the whole Bene Gesserit thing anymore. They just do the Fremen thing. But the Missionary Protectiva has still done its work and prepared the ground so that when Paul and his mother show up, it's like the Christ and his mother. It's the Messiah and his mom showing up. And so it activates the whole religious zeal of the Fremen people when they start to believe this.
Yeah, I was about to say the Lady Jessica has a lot of Mother Mary there / Theotokos qualities to her. And definitely one of them that comes out the most is she has this idea of how special Paul is throughout the book, how she can protect him, what she can do to protect him. She's almost constantly obsessing about it at times in her own internal dialogue. And I noticed that especially, throughout the fight, she goes, well, she almost instinctively predicts what her opponent's going to do. But then she watches Paul and she's like, I can't believe he's turning into the man he's becoming. This is his whole coming out. Well, his whole coming into age. Kind of.
I mean, there's an interchange between her and what's his name? Stilgar.
My favorite character.
And he's Stilgar is great. He is great. But yeah, she's he's never had to kill before.
Yeah.
And Stilgar's like, well, he better learn. Because that's like,
Yeah.
he's because it's the thing, he bests this guy when the tribe first comes upon them. Paul, a guy like an experienced warrior tries to capture him, and Paul like throws him on his butt and is able to run away. And once they kind of make peace, like the guy comes back and he's like, you shamed me, I challenge you to single combat.
Yeah. Yep.
And Paul's like, all right, single combat, and then he's like, fine, I know how to fight. And then he doesn't know, before the fight starts, he's not told, like, he doesn't understand that it's to the death.
And he doesn't kill him.
He does kill him. He has to kill him. He has no choice.
Oh, wait. Paul doesn't. No, Paul sheds his mercy. He doesn't kill him. Shows his mercy. Oh, wait a minute.
No.
Oh no, he does kill him. That's okay.
The guy, is his name Jono or something? I forget his name. But anyway, he has to kill him because the guy forces him to. Essentially, like he wants to be merciful. He doesn't want to kill him, but then the guy.
That's what it is.
And then like, and everyone's like, "Come on, boy, you have to do it." And then like the guy he's fighting is so like, the fact that Paul won't kill him actually shames him further. So he just grabs the knife and like does it like a suicide charge, and Paul has no choice but to defend himself.
Yeah.
And so he dies, and then like his wife and children and all of his body's water are given to Paul. Mm-hmm. And he's 15, right? It's like he just got trapped in the desert. His father's dead. His house lies in ashes. He just had to kill a man, and now he's in charge of the guy's wife, his kids, and his like the water that used to be in his body.
The honor system, yeah. Pure tribal honor right there,
and pragmatism.
Yes,
100% pragmatism, like right off the bat.
Yeah, and that makes. Well, talk about responsibility. that definitely. Kind of ups the ante on the whole, taking responsibility for your actions kind of thing. And there's another kind of foreshadowing with that, because Paul being merciful shows he obviously is virtuous, is a virtuous person in character, and then basically forced into a situation where he has to strike to survive.
Yeah. And actually the entire book is that in writ large, right?
Right.
Yeah. He realizes that it's not just that he's been betrayed and that his house has been, nearly completely destroyed by Harkonnen, but he realizes that the Emperor must be behind it. And he realizes that for the survival of both himself and his mother, but also any of the Fremen that have attached themselves to him, and in addition to the fact that he's also bound by the rules of the Landsraad, like the Duke the Baron just killed his father. So he has to get revenge. And since he has to get revenge, and he's now the Duke, since his father's dead, he simply has to step into the role that he's been trained for, just in a completely different way than he ever imagined.
Trial by fire.
Yeah. And because he's got the weirding way, and his mother has it, they begin to train the Fremen warriors to fight the same way.
And thus his army is created.
And so you've got this whole race of people, right, that are, is it Salusa Secundus? That's it. Salusa Secundus. That's where the Sardaukar are trained.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah. So Arrakis is the only other planet in the known universe to have equally harsh conditions to Salusa Secundus. And so essentially the Fremen become the only people capable of fighting the Sardaukar on equal terms. and they become, they become essentially the new jihadi army once Paul becomes emperor, because the revenge of Atreides on Harkonnen being complete, it doesn't stop there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, Carino is completely unseated, completely, loses all their power, and the Sardaukar, now that they have like a true and living god, they
Mm-hmm.
they now, except he's not God, right?
Yeah. Well.
So they become this horrible jihadi army that
Yeah.
begins to spread from planet to planet, like exterminating anybody that won't sign on to Muad'Dib. And Muad'Dib is
Muad'Dib.
his friend.
We have gone this long without saying
Muad'Dib.
Muad'Dib. Yep. Muad'Dib.
Yes.
It's almost like it's just a meditative kind of word for the Fremen, because they believe in it so strongly, and the symbolism behind that too. It's kind of I mean, it's kind of strange that Paul even picked that, because you think
he sees a mouse. He sees a mouse, a sand mouse in the desert, and he asks, I guess it's Stilgar. He asks, what do you call it? He's like, that's Muad'Dib. So yeah, he's the sand mouse, but it also becomes like the name of the emperor. That's Paul Muad'Dib. But yeah, there's kind of a bit of an Aragorn reflection there too, because there's a little scene in near the end of Lord of the Rings, relatively near the end, when I guess it's someone hears. I think it's like the herb master, or like the healer. So some high. Oh no, it's the Prince Imrahil. I don't know how well you guys are versed on the whole.
Imrahil of Dol Amroth.
Dol Amroth, right? So he hears
in the books, not in the movies.
Correct. Yes, he hears one of the characters call Aragorn Strider, and he says, "Is it thus that we address our kings? But maybe he will take his seat under a new name." And Aragorn says, "Verily." That's what Tolkien, when Aragorn, near the end of Return of the King, like Tolkien sort of, as Aragorn starts coming into his own, we get a lot of the archaic language coming in. But he says, "Verily," and he says, and in the high tongue it will not sound so ill, and Tel Kantar will be the name of my house and all the heirs of my body.
Yeah, so you kind of have this thing where, Aragorn, being of this exiled royal house, has kept their traditions through the generations. He knows all the old tongues. He knows both Elvish and, both Westron, which is the modern tongue, and then Adunaic, which is the old Numenorian.
Right, the Numenorian.
He knows all of them.
Right.
And yeah, so it's kind of funny, all that.
For those who know somewhat of the Numenorian, he says, "I do so, and I care not whether you call it King's Foil or, Area Asanian, so long as you have some." Anyway, Lord of the Rings digression, they can happen at the drop of a hat in these quarters.
Always welcome to. And
it's always appropriate. Yeah, you can't go wrong with it. Like, really, you can't. But
Muad'Dib is the mouse, the sand mouse becomes the name of the emperor.
But then again, there's the mythology behind the sand mouse too, because it's he who hides in the moon too, part of the whole, like, in the shadows and in the light of the moon. It's got a very esoteric vibe to it too. It's
yes.
In of Arabian mythology going on.
Yes.
Well, that's the line from the movie, because Lynch has a couple of times he does a really good job of just simplifying the concepts. And there's a line from the movie where he just he asks Stilgar is, "What do you call the mouse shadow in the second moon?" And then Stilgar says, "We call that one Muad'Dib."
The mouse shit. Okay,
Yeah.
so it's the mouse.
Well,
Yeah.
that's what it is in the Lynch movie. In the book, it's
Okay.
a bit more kind of, down to earth or down to Arrakis.
Yeah.
But yeah, he doesn't go into like the sand mouse and it's running around. It doesn't mention the sand mouse at all in the movie. It's just what do you call the mouse shadow in the second moon?
Mm-hmm.
And it portrays it as like kind of like we have the man in the moon. There's like a sort of the craters on the moon of Arrakis are arranged in like the shape of a mouse.
And not to get too well, I don't know. This is kind of, I guess, that's very sci-fi kind of thing. But in the shadow of the second moon, think about on how Paul was first in the first moon, and then how he is in the second moon. So you could say, in a way, it's his second coming into being, because he literally goes from man to the living, what the Fremen see as the living God. So it's that transition.
Yeah,
that could be there.
You mean that Caladan only had one moon, and now he's
you caught it. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of trippy on its own right. But see, there's all that constant foreshadowing and all that kind of interplay with symbolism too, and to be completely foreign to the sci-fi genre, and how Herbert used the ecology to symbolize.
Yeah, I think actually when he's first talking to Chani, like after they started spending time together, and Chani is Stilgar's daughter, by the way, and the woman that Paul falls in love with, and she asks him to tell her about his homeworld, and he describes the oceans, right? And I think she just starts crying. Right?
Yes.
She can't even conceive, like, just the thought of that much water is completely overwhelming to her.
Well, and then they say you give water to the dead, like when
right,
the man
that he kills, he cries over the fact that he's killed a man, and that's like completely awe-inspiring to the tribe. They're like,
yes,
like they would never shed tears over, like it's a crazy waste of water to do that, but he gives water to the dead. Yeah,
which is also very tribal and reminds me a lot of like a Native American. It's kind of something straight out of like what the Native Americans would do or would say in their ceremonies. You give the water of life, water to the dead. It's all that symbolism and that offering. Well,
that's the Fremen have a tradition, like when they want to show respect for someone, they spit on the floor.
yeah, which is totally the opposite in our culture.
Yeah, it's like a funny little fish out of water scene in all three iterations in the book and in both movies. Is like when Stilgar first is introduced to. Is it Stilgar? I can't remember exactly who it is, but yeah, someone like spits on the floor in front of the Duke, and
yes,
and it's like it's the gift of your body's water.
The gift, yep, the gift. Yeah. That's basically a handshake. I love Stilgar. I mean, he's so matter of fact about everything. He is. In a way, he replaces obviously Duke Leto to Paul, and Stilgar's constantly thinking, "Why isn't
Jessica?" By the way, he and Jessica kind of hook up a little bit.
Yeah. And he constantly thinks, when is Paul going to challenge me to become the tribe leader? When is he going to become?
He expects to be killed by Paul.
He's constantly looking over his shoulder with this, and it shows. It shows the amount of respect Paul has for, I guess his second father figure in Stilgar. Because if it wasn't for the guidance, the wisdom, and just the straight matter of fact, hey, this is how it's going to be, kid, from Stilgar, I mean,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have had, I don't think without that kind of character.
Well, they literally required initially Stilgar had to give his protection to Paul and Jessica because they're not members of the tribe, even though they're like right away. Like when he kills the guy, he's responsible for his water and stuff, but they're under Stilgar's protection initially. But yeah, but then Paul's like, no, I'm not. He gets real Duke like. He stops being a tribesman and he says, no, I'm not going to kill one of my best men. I'm your Duke. And then it's like, because he never forgets. That's the other piece. He never actually forgets that the House Atreides has been usurped by Harkonnen.
He kind of knows the whole time he's technically supposed to be the legitimate sovereign of these people in a way.
Absolutely. He never forgets it, actually. I mean, we mentioned the internal monologue. There's one going on with Paul the whole time as well. And he's constantly calculating, like, okay, he's got to be patient. He can't start, acting all imperial over these people. They won't have it. It's just simple. Like they're not just going to be overawed because he says he's the Duke. He doesn't say I'm your Duke until Stilgar finally openly says, "When are you going to kill me?" Essentially, it's like because you should have killed me by now. You're wasting time. Like
yeah.
The response is essentially by saying that he's almost saying he's got bigger fish to fry.
Well, he's saying, yeah, that's what he says. Yeah, he's like, you are my best man. You're going to lead the Fedakeen, which are like Paul's personal bodyguard that he and his mother have trained in the Weirding way. And because I am your Duke. So yeah, he takes up the coronet or whatever at that point. The ducal signet ring, right? That he's never. We haven't even talked about Dr. Yui. But yeah, that's kind of maybe a whole tangent, but yeah, he's
on the Mentats.
No, Dr. Yui.
Dr.
The Sook doctor who so like they're betrayed. The whole reason that they're able to be betrayed in the first place, or to be in the first place, is because they're betrayed by their longtime old friend and dear mentor and teacher, Dr. Yui, Dr. Wellington Yui, who like all physicians that attend any Great Lords of the Landsrod, they receive what's called Sook conditioning, and it's basically they have like it means that they have like a mark on their forehead that indicates that they're safe to take care of royalty and nobility. They're not going to try to kill you. And so, but Dr. Yui's Sook conditioning has been broken by Baron Harkonnen's Mentat. And the Mentat, again, are the human computers. And usually they're also like the spy masters of the great houses. Great performance by Brad Dourif, who played Grima Wormtongue in the Lord of the Rings movies, who plays Piter de Vries, the Mentat Master of Assassins to the House of Harkonnen. A great character.
Holy cow! I never. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Great performance. Way over the top. Fantastic.
Oh, devious. Totally devious. So, the eyebrows, too. The eyebrows kill me.
Yes, yeah. So he has broken the Sook conditioning, and the way he did it was by teasing Dr. Yui with the possibility that his wife might be alive. So it's typical Harkonnen, bad guy cruelty level stuff. But they've broken the suit conditioning, and Wellington Huey betrays the House Atreides on the off chance that his wife might be alive, and so you have the wonderful line, "1,000 deaths are not enough for Huey."
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
um,
Kind of has a Mr. Freeze vibe to it, or Dr. Freeze vibe to it with Batman. You know, how he keeps his wife Elsa a lot, or well, in kind of a stasis, a freezing stasis, and her heart has to be frozen. But, you know, he'll find the cure to unfreeze her and be with her again.
right. But she's already dead, and
Yeah.
and
Oops.
and so so upon but Yui knew she was probably going to die, and so but he still had to betray anyway. It's the whole thing. But the point is, he left the ducal signet ring for Paul to find. So he did betray the house. He brought down the shield that allowed the Harkonnen to come in and the Sardaukar troops to come in.
Mm-hmm.
But he also provided Paul and Jessica with the means of escape.
So he showed his humanity. He showed his care for his true nature. And this is also strange with House Harkonnen, because you don't get this with a lot of villains, especially nowadays. House Harkonnen did have that absolutely degenerate side to them, but they also had the manipulative, cunning, political side to them that was overarchingly kind of brilliant on how they tried to orchestrate things to get to their own advantages, and how they jockeyed for position, and them being.
The whole plan with Fade is an example of that. Like I mentioned before, like Raban exists for the executioner. That's his whole purpose in life, though he doesn't know it. Is to be killed essentially by Fade.
Mm-hmm.
The Baron's plan is he knows he's not going to live forever, and so he's training Fade to be his heir. But after they take over management of Arrakis, he gives the direct management to Raban. And the whole point is he knows that Raban is a fool. And he knows that Raban is going to, and he specifically orders him to like grind the people into dust. He's like, just subjugate the hell out of these people. And Raban proceeds to do just that. And, it's a horrible, oppressive yoke, and it lasts for years. Because the book, a whole bunch of years of time is skipped at a certain point. We just sort of jump forward and see, like, it's years later, and Paul has, been spending years coordinating sort of, I guess you could call it an insurrection.
And taking over Arrakis bit by bit from the Harkonnen because of, he's got to build an army.
He's disrupting their spice operations. He's essentially leading a terrorist force from the heart of the desert, and training the Fremen at the same time.
Which is definitely more of a modern interpretation on Middle Eastern culture.
Absolutely.
Well, at the same time, when you go back into the old Orientalism, as it were, I really do see just tons and tons of correlations with.
It's like the old man of the mountains, the Hashashin and all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, just with the Arab revolt, like these are the sort of the Saudis coming out of the desert to go harass the Ottoman positions in Arabia, stuff like that.
Yeah, and so that goes on for years, and Raban's doing well oppressing the people. He does not do well dealing with Muad'Dib. He also doesn't know that Muad'Dib is Paul. Everyone thinks Paul and his mother are dead. They just know that there's this new weird cult leader that's come out of the desert that has united a bunch of the Fremen, and they call him Muad'Dib. But the Harkonnen plan is Raban will oppress the people for a number of years, and then Fade will come in and have Raban killed and overthrow his tyrannous rule and become the savior for the people. That's Baron Harkonnen's ultimate plan for his heir. because he wants his heir to be known. He knows his reputation, and he knows Raban's reputation. But Fade is essentially a blank slate, even though he's just as degenerate and weird as any of the other Harkonnen. He's presented anyway as sort of, he's like a young, pretty boy. He's sort of Paul. He's the mirror image of Paul, really.
So a fake savior versus the real savior, which has got to, and see, there's the other thing. Like Fade Ralpha doesn't have a struggle. He doesn't have anything in front of him to prove himself. He just kind of steps in and is like,
actually,
hey.
no. Remember, he likes to kill gladiators in the arena.
Oh well, yeah.
Right. So it is a put up job. It's kind of like, Emperor Commodus fighting, gladiators that had dulled blades, and he's got a poison knife and stuff like that. So but he does kill, like, unlike Paul, like, they're sort of juxtaposition. Like, Fade has killed hundreds of men before, the main action of the book begins. Just recreationally in the arena. Yeah. So he does know how to fight, but not desert fashion.
It's not at the level, not at the level, and the train struggle Paul has to go through to become who Paul finally became.
The other aspect of it is they're both part of the same breeding program.
Yes,
that Fade. So it's revealed later in Dune Messiah and Children of Dune that that the Baron Harkonnen is actually Jessica's father.
Oh boy, I see. Man,
one of
the most famous movie lines is coming through my mind right now.
Indeed.
This is all like a giant family feud. Not even two families, but the same family of sorts.
They don't know it, because again, it's all through the fact that it's the Bene Gesserit secret breeding program. So the thing about the Bene Gesserit sisters is most of them don't know who their parents are. And that's on purpose, because of the fact that they may have to break like some incest taboos in order to carry on at certain stages of the breeding program. And this is one of them. But the point is, Fade is a product of just a tiny bit of remove from Paul in terms of his place in the breeding program's, continuum. And so he has all the same potential to be Kwisatz Haderach that Paul does, actually. Of course, he's not in any way tied into the whole water of life cycle or any of that stuff. But he has the same human capacities that Paul does. And of course, one of the climactic scene of the book really is a knife fight between Paul and Fade. Which Fade loses.
And once again, Paul has to he showed somewhat mercy, and then he ended up killing Fade.
Yes.
Again. So there it is again.
Yes.
And then overarchingly or overbearingly, is basically like, now I have to show my power. Now I have to prove who I really am to these people, because they didn't believe who I was before, and I had to hide my identity behind the moon.
Yes, behind the shadow of the moon.
Behind the shadow of the moon, and then come out of that shadow. And then in another sense, he's coming out of his own shadow. He never really had to come out of his father's shadow, and they say in the hero's journey, you have to kill your father to become a man. I mean, kill your father could be metaphorical or it could be literal, but
right. There's an Italian saying too. You don't become a man until your father dies.
Oh, yeah. So it's it's his whole protagonist. This whole protagonist process is just a bunch. It's just a lot of foreshadowing on who he is and who he can become, and the potential that's there.
So we're way long, which is fine with me. But right now, I want to jump forward. We're going to just jump forward here.
Okay.
Okay. So everything, it works out great. We talked about, there's a bunch more. I mean, I recommend the book to anybody that's like maybe 20 or above. It's not that you can't understand it if you're younger than that. It's that it's not really going to. I don't think it you need a bit more maturity, I think, before you can really appreciate it properly.
Well, it's not the flashy sci-fi stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's got lots of interesting, and there is obviously a lot of weird, grim, dark blood and guts stuff in it, but it's not exactly like a page turner in an action book sense.
It's
not
weird,
over the top,
That too,
like some series are.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I wonder.
It's when you start digging into, the nature of the world that the over the topness kind of comes through. It's like, oh my god, the bile from a baby worm.
Yeah.
Like that's the what's what you call the water of life. But
there is a complete naturalistic dialectic to it. I mean, there's just so much naturalism to it that it makes it so that you could literally like almost taste the sand coming off of Arrakis.
Yeah, and there is a very nature oriented ecological aspect to the whole series. So one of the paradoxes is that, right, everybody, like I say, Chani cries when she hears about Caladan. She can't imagine that much water. Liet Kynes has had this, water collection program going now for decades, where the Fremen have all these caches of water. And the way that they bring the Empire to its knees is they have taken all of these water caches and they have positioned them above all of the major pre-spice masses that they can find everywhere on the planet. Which means that if they pour all the water out, it will destroy all of the spice at once, which would essentially throw the entire empire into chaos. Interstellar travel would become impossible, and it would be apocalyptic. And because of that, the emperor has to do whatever Paul says. It's just as simple as that. It's like he has no choice. Because the Spacing Guild, at that point, like the Spacing Guild's like, yeah, we like Paul now. So we'll take the Muad'Dib option because he's the one who can destroy us all in a moment. And so the Emperor has to step down. But we talked about the jihad that comes after that and everything. The whole thing is, right, with these water caches, it's Paul that makes the decision to threaten all of the spice. That's the chaos element he throws into it. That was not the Fremen plan. The Fremen plan was to use all the water to change the face of Arrakis, to turn it into a green planet. The problem with that is if you turn Arrakis into a green planet, all the worms will go away, and there will again be no more spice.
Yeah.
So
it's like it's kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation. Of course, from the Fremen's perspective, they probably don't care much about the spice.
They don't care. Yeah, they don't care. They don't care about interstellar travel or life on any other planet.
Yeah, and meanwhile, Paul's having to look at the bigger picture and see, okay, I've got a bigger struggle to win here, so I've got to do things my way.
And that's why he's a prisoner. That's why he's trapped by his own destiny. He has really no choice but to take the actions that he takes in the main book. But having done that and having become emperor, he also has no choice in what's to come after that, which is the jihad and billions dead. he's like in despair over this. By the time Dune Messiah, the book, comes around, he has absolutely perfect foresight. And at a certain point in Dune Messiah, he loses his eyesight. Someone attempts to assassinate him and sets off like a small atomic weapon nearby him, and he's looking at it when it goes off. And he knows that it's going to go off. He knows it's going to happen. He looks at it on purpose only because he has seen it in his future. So he gets to a certain point in his life where he doesn't try to avoid what he knows is coming. He just sort of rolls with it. And when he loses his eyesight, he abides by Fremen tradition, and he goes into the desert to die. Because that's what blind people are supposed to do in Fremen tribes.
Yeah, they can become kind of this halfway assimilated, like he's almost got this imperial Fremen culture, if you will. Like he's kind of created a Fremen empire, if you will.
That's what he does, yeah. And I mean, it starts to run despite him, and he can't do anything about it, and he sort of gives up. He allows himself to be struck blind and goes out into the desert to die, but he doesn't die.
Because he literally can't. I mean, he can't die.
Well, sandworms won't. He gets picked up in the desert by this rogue tribe called Jakarutu. And this is a big part of the plot of the third book of the Children of Dune, which is really, these three books are kind of like, the second and third book are kind of direct sequels to the first one. And they're a heretical tribe. They still practice all the ancient Fremen ways. They don't believe in Muad'Dib. They hate everybody else. They kill everybody else on sight. They're just an old school Fremen tribe. But they recognize Paul. They take him in, and essentially and he has no choice. I mean, he doesn't try to kill himself or anything. He's blind, and they take him in, and just like he becomes this sort of mad prophet. And they take him in, and then they release him back onto the streets of Arrakeen, which is the capital city, and also now the new imperial seat. And he comes back as a prophet and begins preaching against the Empire and against his sister, Alia. We haven't talked about Alia. Now, Alia is his sister. She was conceived when the night before he and his father and mother left Caladan to go to Arrakis. And because Jessica, in order to prove the fact that she was a Reverend Mother, she also has to take the water of life, but she takes it while she's pregnant. So Alia gains complete cognizance and like crazy perfect foresight, and also perfect race memory, which is another big aspect of the book, actually. People remember, they get to a point where they start to remember everything that happened to their ancestors. And it goes back like tens of thousands of years, and like people start remembering things like, I remember being Agamemnon and stuff like that. So this preborn girl gains complete, maturity of thought, and like, and also becomes like a perfect Bene Gesserit before she's born. And that's Paul's sister. And she goes insane. She becomes the abomination. Because her grandfather, and who's her grandfather again?
Harkonnen, Baron Harkonnen.
He begins speaking to her in her mind. Part of her perfect race memory essentially resurrects her grandfather within her own mind. And he begins manipulating her and controlling her.
Now, is this after his death? Like, is
yes,
he doing this? Oh, okay.
He dies at the end of the first book.
Like a twisted voice of conscience.
He dies. He's killed by Alia. It's Alia that kills him. She stabs him with the Gom Jabbar, the same needle with the poison on it that was threatened by the Reverend Mother earlier on in the book.
Yeah, think of like a toddler just with like super mind control and just which would just be
yeah, because by the time that's when I think she's 5.
Yeah.
At the end of Dune, she's 5 years old. So yeah, at 5 she kills her grandfather.
She's just
right. So
she's one of the craziest characters of the book, too.
Yes, and she gets crazier, much crazier. And she's essentially like the regent, because after Paul goes away, there's no emperor. Paul has 2 children, Leto and Ganima, twins, and they're being raised by Alia and by their grandmother Jessica, primarily, and also trained by the people who trained Paul, like Gurney Halleck and guys like that are still around helping out. So here's the thing, is that Paul's son, also his 2 children, they also have nearly perfect foresight. They're not as crazy, as Alia, because they didn't get the water of life in the womb, but they are incredibly talented children and everything. Leto the second, he begins to have a vision. He realizes that the mad prophet, is his father and everything. But he also realizes that his aunt is completely bonkers evil. So that he has to essentially walk on eggshells to not be killed himself. And he realizes this from childhood, from like young childhood. So there's kind of like a Gospel of Thomas thing. There's like a feel to this whole thing. That's, I don't know if you guys have read any of that. It's the non-canonical, Dead Sea Scrolls.
The Gnostic Gospel of Thomas.
Gnostic Gospel. Yes, the Gnostic Gospel.
Okay, yeah, that's a very short one.
There's also like the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, which is like a whole other thing where it talks about. I don't believe this. I don't subscribe to it. I don't recommend it. It's out there. But it talks about like Jesus is like, accidentally killing a kid because he got angry because he lost in a game or something like that, and like bringing him back to life. And it's just great. Little.
Oh yeah, I've seen that on the History Channel.
Yeah.
Of course, because of course it was on the History Channel.
Of course. Yes, the truth about Jesus. Yeah.
Aliens.
Right. I'm not saying it was aliens,
but I'm saying it might have been.
That's your people, JP. Remember that.
I do. Yes, I know. I'm proud of his hair too. He's got great hair.
But so Leto sees something that his father couldn't see, which is what he calls the golden path. But the problem is his father didn't really understand or have the will that was necessary to enact the golden path. What is the golden path? Well, that's why the book God Emperor of Dune takes place 4,000 years after Children of Dune. Because what Leto does, Leto II, he realizes that that Arrakis does need to become green. But he also realizes that in order to make that happen, the only way to actually control it is to become the emperor, to become the God Emperor forever, functionally. He's going to take personal control of the entire empire by making himself immortal. And the way he makes himself immortal is he goes to where the sand trout are. It's finally revealed at the end, in the 3rd book exactly what sandworms are, which is that they're They're a collection of sand trout, which are like these tiny sand swimming creatures that whenever there's water, they will attach themselves around it, and more sand trout will come along and link up with each other. And once enough of them have linked up, they become this sort of symbiotic gestalt organism called the sandworm.
By this point, how much acid do you think Frank Herbert was dropping a day?
I don't know. It's a good question. But so Leto realizes what he needs to do is he needs to become a worm. And so he goes to where the sand trout are. He finds a bunch of them, gathers them together, and sticks his arm just in the middle of them.
Symbiosis. I mean, he becomes a symbiotic organism with the worms.
Yes, he not with but with, like the trout surround his entire body because he, of course, his body is full of water, and so the trout grab onto him and surround his entire body, and he essentially attains immediate superpowers. He gets because he's he begins to be able to he turns the trout into extensions of his own will, and he can like run super fast. He can jump super high. He's got superhuman strength.
The trout has turned him into Captain America.
For a little while, until eventually,
he becomes one.
Over the course of 4,000 years, we have the God Emperor. He's essentially, he looks like this crazy sort of Sphinx snake worm character.
It's so wild.
He's no longer remotely human. He's, he is, and when God Emperor of Dune begins, he himself is the only remaining sandworm. He is the sole source of the spice.
But think of how crazy this is too, because of Paul taking something that's an animal, the Muad'Dib, and have that kind of foreshadowing of him, becoming something greater than he is with the small animal, right. And then his son literally becoming an animal.
Yes. And the thing, so the golden path, and that's not even like the golden path. He only becomes it's not the goal. It's not just him becoming a sandworm. The golden path is he needs to free the human race. He realizes that the way that the human race will ever be free is if they live under tyranny for so long that they will never live under it again. Like that the human race will have learned to. They will have. Go ahead.
So he's the ultimate accelerationist.
Yeah, except it's like over the course of 4,000 years. So it's like, but yes, I mean, that's the thing. He understands there's a problem with accelerationism too, because it burns itself out and it turns into tyranny again. So his thing is, no, I'm going to become the personal dictator of the entire known universe, and I'm going to do it over the course of millennia, and I'm going to personally make sure that the whole human race together is ready to be free, and that's when I'll die. and so that's where when we begin God Emperor of Dune, Arrakis is a green planet, and one of the main characters is a female descendant of House Atreides that is engaged in terrorist activities against the God Emperor, which is all according to plan, all according to his plan. But she doesn't know that, and nobody else knows that. It's only he that knows that. That's the golden path. Like it's very strange. It's a strange conceit. I mean, obviously, it's super weird just by itself, but Um, but it's interesting that like that's what like Frank Herbert couldn't see his way in his imagined universe. He couldn't see his way out of out of tyranny being like an inevitability of mankind or something.
Yeah.
Now, on that note, though, does humanity ever really wake up? Or does the Emperor just live forever because humanity is just not inclined to
Yeah.
ever learn?
The God Emperor is killed. Yeah, that's part of the deal. And then in the later books, we've got Chapter House and Heretics of Dune. Because all these other institutions also had their own sort of continuances. So, like the Bene Gesserit turn into a whole different kind of thing, similar but different. The Spacing Guild as well. Now, JP mentioned Tleilaxu way at the beginning of this,
I did.
and they're interesting.
Well, the word theocracy comes to mind for them. But they're a technological theocracy, which is kind of mind blowing. And at the same time, another juxtaposition on the entire Dune universe because of the Butlerian Jihad.
Right. No, they occupy themselves a lot. They spend time. They break the rules.
Yes.
That's the Tleilaxu's deal. Is they break the rules. Well, it's Bene Tleilax, right? Bene Tleilax.
Yeah.
It's so they're the Bene Tleilax, and that's like
part of the Bene Gesserit.
They used to be part of the same deal, but they're like the male versions of it.
Yes.
And they also have like a different kind of near perfect bodily control. So they have like the ability to change their face. They have like a discipline within them called face
dancers. Yes.
And they can like completely change their physical appearance. Which is
yeah, it's also nuts, but it also goes to once again Native American culture with the skinwalkers. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Native Americans literally believed, medicine men of their tribe could literally change physical form.
Yes. Now, do you remember how their clones, because they also clone people.
How they're cloned? They're asexual reproduction.
Not exactly. And this is where it gets even
weirder,
crazier, and horribly weird. Because
yes,
you want to take a crack at what their clone vats are.
They're clone vats,
like the things that their clones are grown in.
Ugh. Well, obviously, they artificial wombs, but are they?
They're not artificial.
I was about to say that sounds like that's where they're going. They clone them inside of a mother.
They don't even have so Tleilaxu females are not sentient beings anymore. They have been genetically engineered to be nothing but just giant reusable
factories.
Wombs. Yes, they have no recognizable human shape anymore. They're just a womb that clones can be, human beings, quote unquote, can be grown in.
This remind me of some of the more grim dark stuff I've read.
Yeah, I mean, the Tleilaxu is when you start getting into the real it's been grim dark up to now, actually, but that's like their thing is, yeah, it's twisted.
They're like Harkonnen on transhuman steroids.
Yeah, and they're not as, the difference is they're not as decadent. They're extremely disciplined like the Bene Gesserit or like the Mentats, but they just have absolutely zero morality.
Yeah,
they're like well, once again, the 40K parallel I was referencing was they remind me of the Iron Warriors. If you know about that particular Space Marine Legion, That's what they remind me of. Just amoral, technocratic, do weird reproductive shit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's Tlilax, and Tlilaxu clones do figure pretty large in the later books. The like, for example, in Children of Dune, the Tlilax, or actually this happens in Dune Messiah. The Tlilaxu give to Paul as a gift a clone of Duncan Idaho, and Duncan Idaho is was like the sword master to Duke Leto. So he's one of the men who trained Paul in how to fight and leads like his special forces contingents and stuff like that. And he's killed in a Harkonnen strike, like airstrike on one of the Fremen sieges, and so the Tlilaxu have, found some of his genetic material, and they've cloned him as a gift to Paul, but actually they've preconditioned the clone from birth to be an assassin and to react to certain key words. Actually, it's a melody, and it's like a melody that later on in the assassination, like when they trigger the clone, it becomes a battle like within, because Duncan Idaho has like all of Duncan Idaho's memories and everything, and so he has like this internal where he sort of freezes up internally completely as his brain kind of enters into this weird fugue state, and he tries to snap out of his assassination conditioning. And by the time the God Emperor is around, the Duke Leto, or rather the Emperor, he's on his like 50th Duncan Idaho clone, because Duncan Idaho will always try to assassinate the Emperor, not because of Tlilaxu conditioning, but because it's the right thing to do. And and this is something that Leto II knows, the God Emperor. So he just keeps getting more Duncan Idahos. Every time Duncan tries to kill him and he has to be killed, he'll just get another. He just gets another Duncan, and he knows that it's going to happen again.
It's just meme tier stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, cruel and unusual punishment at its finest.
Yeah.
Duncan Idaho, who comes back, it's not probably taken from the word golem, but they call him a Gola.
He's a Gola, yeah, which is like a sort of Jewish mysticism thing.
And that is pretty cool because, once again, drawing from Middle Eastern culture,
yeah,
that is an obvious theme throughout all of it. And the Teliexu, in a way, well, I guess could be various cultures, but they kind of give off.
Careful.
Yeah, I know. But well, I'm gonna say
we're not syndicated. Speak your mind.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they do give off the Matrix, a ton of Matrix vibes with the artificial wombs, and I mean, like people grown in vats for machines, the sake of machines. However, obviously, they're not machine or I mean, they're kind of machine oriented, but the transhuman sensibilities that tie in to the theocratic and technocratic ways of going about things, and then being able to create, well, quote unquote, create life, within more life. I mean, I guess they get a sense of them becoming gods themselves, I mean, and them to try to overthrow God and Paul.
It's kind of funny because I mean, the one thing that, I mean, probably the major separation between Dune and Lord of the Rings, I mean, there's obviously not a whole ton of similarities actually in the stories themselves, but I think the biggest point of separation is probably pride. I mean, this is one of the reasons why. I mean, it's interesting to read the other books, and it's all, but they really just get weirder because it's like Herbert. I don't know how much of this he had planned out in advance. Like Dune, it's almost like Star Wars. It's like, or The Matrix. You, it's a perfectly well self-contained story. You don't actually need anything beyond the first book/movie. But when it became clear, it was like, well, people, there's a taste for this. All right, well, let's write some more. Let's make some more. You're kind of, what are you really doing at that point? You're, like, I love Empire Strikes Back. Don't get me wrong. I love, Return of the Jedi almost as much. The second and third Matrix movies were nonsense. And they were fun nonsense, but they were kind of ridiculous. They didn't really need to be. And I don't think the other Dune books really needed to exist either. They're interesting, but you kind of get the whole story that you need to get in the first one.
Yeah, the first story kind of just arrives to its natural conclusion.
And it's a hero's journey.
Yes, purely.
But the problem is you go beyond that, and I think what's most revealing about it is that it kind of reveals Herbert's inability to conceive of true humility. That's what it seems to me. Like he's obsessed with these things. He's obsessed with mysticism. He's obsessed with drug use. He's obsessed with aristocracy. And everyone is a long-term planner. Everyone is a conniver. Everyone is trying to one-up their neighbor, even the good guys, even the actual good guys. The only one who's conceivably not trying to one-up his neighbor is still engaged in Camley with, the Duke Leto, the first Duke. He's still like, part of the Landsrod and lording it over people. And, his main problem is he's too trusting. It gets sort of a Ned Stark situation. I much prefer Herbert to George Martin. I would read Dune 1,000 times before I'd read another one of those travesties of it. Pardon my opinion or anything. I hope I'm not offending anyone. But
we're not syndicated.
Not a big fan of the Song of Ice and Fire books.
Yeah, I have no idea what the hype is around Game of Thrones at all. So don't worry about it.
It's easy. It's easily justified, easily digested material for like normie types who are kind of interested in the stuff, but not really. And it ties into non-fantasy genres that they like. Yeah. It ties into the whole law enforcement thriller and all these other things, spy movies, you name it. But the books are much more advanced than the show, but they're still clearly leagues below anything like Tolkien, God forbid, or even more mid-tier ones. Like even Conan the Barbarian, I'd say is well above.
It is because. Oh, anyway, that's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other subject, but the point is that that I would compare it to Dune only in the sense that the author, he's fundamentally, even though he's in Dune, he pulls off telling a complete mythological tale. After that, it turns into just sort of, it's like he captured lightning in a bottle. He doesn't really know where to go after that. And so he just goes in the same old directions, which is, gamesmanship and pridefulness and the sort of weird monstrosity, absurd monstrosity of continuing to resurrect Duncan, Idaho, and
it's kind of almost, I see a bit of permanent revolution in the writing here, right?
Yeah.
Nothing can ever be right, so.
Yeah. And methodically, I mean, the first Dune is methodical. I mean, from what you're describing, the rest of it is kind of pieced together because of the other worlds existing, but it's still kind of static, but then it's not because of Paul, because he's a factor, an agent of chaos, and he knows he's filled with this terrible purpose, but then you have to justify why the terrible purpose is happening, but then the other races slash houses seem grateful, but then again, they don't. So it's kind of like...
I mean, it's right. We mentioned the fact that like the Harkonnens and the Atreides are very, it's very black and white.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, there's a fairy tale element to it. And once he starts to get into the particulars of the aftermath and everything like that, it's like, well, it kind of goes away and a lot of the charm is lost.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of this can be summed up as being the fall of the Atreides.
Yeah, I mean, it absolutely. Actually, Tolkien did run into the same problem, and I think that's probably why he never really felt inspired to continue a Lord of the Rings sequel that he started.
Oh, I'm so glad.
Like he started. I mean, it's interesting, but it's not more. It's no more than interesting. It's like it was going to be about Aragorn's son, which is fine. It's like it's curious and all, but that's not. Whatever. I mean, he didn't. The point is, he didn't feel personally inspired to continue, because really, you're just going to tell another version of the same story.
The same story, yeah.
Or at best, a much more mundane version of the previous one, because the Fourth Age is inherently more mundane than the previous ages. Like that's just kind of an element to it. Magic slowly dying out and things like that.
And I mean, it was already, he kind of already told a lot of that story in the appendices, and not what happened after, but when you get into the whole, like the histories, the annals of the kings and rulers and all of that, and you look at like the Númenórean kings, and then the kings of Gondor, and all the different, there's all that stuff that's in the kind of stuff that's in Game of Thrones is there, but it's not the kind of stories that Tolkien was actually interested in telling. He's not interested in telling a story about political internecine, struggle between great houses and stuff like that. It's just not. He's like, whatever. He's like, that stuff. He's like, of course that stuff's going on. People are people. This is a different kind of story, and it's kind of the same with Dune. Like that's the context that things are taking place in, but it's not the meat of the matter. It's not what's driving the narrative interest of the reader. You're not reading to find out because you want to know whether or not who's going to pull what move to win in the great struggle.
And then the struggle weirdly kind of dies off with Leto II too, because
he becomes the absolute tyrant of everybody. So it goes back to being static, actually.
Which is and he becomes like the absolute struggle within himself. I mean, he gets to the pinnacle of, I guess, of a symbiotic existence as far as melding of, well, I guess you could call this another form of transhumanism, but it's a more naturalistic take on it. Rather than melding with machine, he literally melds with something from nature and becomes the pinnacle of, well, of something, of whatever Herbert was trying to conceive. And
I don't know, like at that point,
abominations, really. I mean,
it's a story of competing abominations, is what it is.
Yeah, it's just so much acid. So much acid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Did he go to Woodstock?
I think he was maybe a little old for that, but because he was already in his like 40s, I think, in the 60s.
Fun fact, Iron Maiden wrote a song about Dune called The Nomad, and they actually asked Frank Herbert to use some names and for copyright issues and stuff. Frank Herbert turned him down because he didn't like heavy metal music.
Well, Yeah, I mean, oh well. Yeah, I wonder. I don't know if Lord of the Rings. I mean, if Led Zeppelin asked the Tolkien estate for permission
Yeah,
to use Mordor and Gollum in Ramble On.
yeah. I have no idea.
But yeah, I need to call it a night, gentlemen. It's been a great pleasure, though. 2 hours and 40 minutes in,
We we did
into
it.
into an hour long.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Well, so much for
um,
saying it's going to be an hour.
that's fine. Sorry,
Well,
sorry.
it worked out because this
Yeah.
is our normal recording length is 2 to 2.5. So
Okay.
I appreciate
Okay.
that.
Well, yeah, and so I'm sorry for if I dominated and I just anytime I get a chance to talk about Dune, it kind of turns into something else.
Nice.
But,
I learned a lot. Some new stuff too. So I appreciate it.
My pleasure. God, God bless you both, and
God bless you too.
and everybody listening. And maybe one day we can actually talk about some spiritual content or something like that. That might be fun too.
And also in the future, when the movie finally does come out, the
Oh yeah,
new and improved, shiny, polished Dennis Villeneuve take on it.
yes. I mean, look, I know Hollywood is crap and all that. I'm still looking forward to that movie, like a lot.
I'm telling you, like that trailer, at first off, I was like, oh man, this is gonna I guess this is gonna kind of suck. It's gonna be cheesy, hokey, and woke. But judging from the trailer, not in the
No.
least. And I cannot believe that Stellan Skarsgård. I cannot believe that's him. Like,
And he's Duke Leto.
no, he's
Oh,
Baron
he's Baron
Harkonnen.
Harkonnen. Okay, yeah.
He is. It's
It's
so eerie.
Oscar Isaac. Oscar Isaac is Duke Leto.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
and that's a great. Yeah, I mean,
Great-
talk about
great
a guy
choice.
who obviously with the last name of Atreides, and you think about obviously a Greek. Look, Oscar Isaac looks like a Greek guy.
Yeah,
So.
yeah, and I mean, and it's going to be a two-parter, which is something I didn't. I mean, I knew that. I've known it for a few months, but when the first trailer came out, it was like, there's absolutely no scenes in this trailer from what I know to be the second half of the story.
Mm-hmm.
So that means I think probably the first movie is going to end with Harkonnen taking over, or it's very possible that the first movie ends with Harkonnen taking over, like
Mm-hmm.
and Atreides being betrayed. But we'll have to see. I'm very, but there's like very few shots of any of the action that takes place after that. So
Yeah, it's more so just like cut scenes, kind of action, and a lot of narration. So
all right, gentlemen, it's been a pleasure.
all right,
And I'll see you. I'll see you in the chats.
all right.
All right, Father. God bless.
God bless you too. Have a good night.
You too. God bless.
Bye bye.
Well, that was a discussion. That was almost 3 hours of Dune. Man, y'all are nerds. Like I wasn't expecting so much depth. I'm pleasantly surprised. It's good to hear about something that I'm not already knees deep in.
And I'm kind of shocked by that.
That's unusual for me.
I know.
Usually I'm the one spurging out, so it's a change.
You're quite astute.
I try.
So yeah.
Yeah. I've become a bit less, but mostly because I've tried to be a bit more balanced in recent years. But anyway, it's been good, man. I think we can definitely call it now. If we keep talking, we'll be talking for 5 hours like JJ did last week.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Well, I was on with them until like 2 a.m, I think.
Oof, I did it once.
Yeah.
Or twice.
Yeah. Well, talking about the whole movie thing, that would be good for you and Father Chris to go on with JJ about. I think.
Yeah,
I feel like y'all would cover that
it.
probably. Y'all would cover that probably better than I would here, especially considering it's likely I won't even watch the movie. So, yeah. But anywho, yeah, that's about it for now. So we'll have to find some more stuff to talk about here in the next couple weeks, and it's been good. So I just want to tell everybody, God bless and peace out.
We'll make it happen for sure. Yes, everybody. Like Berger said, peace out. Later.
The planet is Arrakis, also known as Dune.